The evening rush at Central Station was a blur of motion. Suitcases rolling, heels striking against tile, muffled announcements echoing in the air thick with departure. Amid the chaos, a girl stood still. Maya's fingers trembled around the handle of a small suitcase, the leather worn and scuffed, as if it had carried too many goodbyes. Her other hand clutched a red scarf, the only color against her pale skin in the washed-out light. The scarf fluttered as a train thundered past, brushing against her cheek like a memory she couldn't shake off. She wasn't waiting for anyone. She was watching. Across the crowd, through the glass reflection of the ticket counter, her eyes found him, Daniel. He stood by the gate, his coat sharp, his posture unshaken. People passed between them like waves between two drowning souls, but she saw him clearly. The tilt of his head, the way his hands slid into his pockets, the same hands that once held hers. For a moment, time stilled. Her breath caught. The loudspeaker announced the 7:15 train to Ridgefield, but all she heard was the quiet echo of his voice from years ago. "You'll never leave me, Maya. You wouldn't dare." The scarf slipped slightly from her hand, brushing the floor. She stared at it, feeling the weight of that single thread, like every promise he broke had been woven into it. The crowd surged forward as the train doors opened. Daniel turned slightly, glancing over his shoulder. His gaze swept the platform, indifferent, almost careless. Then his eyes froze. Their gazes met, brief, fragile, electric. Maya didn't flinch this time. Her heartbeat drummed through her chest, but her eyes stayed steady, colder than before. He blinked, a flicker of confusion crossing his face, then something else. Fear, maybe, though he hid it well. She whispered under her breath, barely audible even to herself. "You remember me now, don't you?" A child tugged at her coat as they passed, and the moment shattered. The train horn wailed. The scarf slipped completely, landing near the edge of the platform. Maya bent slowly, picking it up, her fingers brushing against the cold metal rail. When she straightened, Daniel was gone. The crowd had swallowed him whole. But Maya didn't chase. She wrapped the red scarf tightly around her neck, its fabric trembling against her pulse. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass door, eyes burning yet calm. The suitcase at her side thudded softly as she walked away from the platform. There was no goodbye this time, only the quiet promise that pain, hers, would no longer be forgotten. And somewhere between the noise of the departing train and the silence of her steps, the punishment had already begun. The train was gone, but the echo of its departure clung to the air like a heartbeat that refused to fade. Maya sat on a bench near the end of the platform, her suitcase resting by her feet. The red scarf lay across her lap now, and she ran her thumb along its frayed edge, soft, fragile, but stubbornly holding together. She remembered when her mother had given it to her. It was winter, the kind of cold that cracked the lips and made every breath visible. Her mother had wrapped the scarf around her neck before school, saying, "When it's too cold to speak, this will keep you warm enough to remember who you are." Maya had laughed then. She didn't understand what her mother meant, until years later, when words themselves had turned into weapons. Now the scarf wasn't warmth, it was a wound she carried willingly. A gust of wind blew through the station, carrying laughter from a group nearby. A young woman rushed into her lover's arms, her suitcase slipping from her grasp as they held each other. Maya looked away. That kind of reunion no longer belonged in her world. She pulled her coat tighter and pressed her palms together, feeling the dry cracks of her skin. Every inch of her reflected survival, cheap fabric, tired eyes, the quiet ache of someone who had worked too hard for too little. Behind her, a man leaned against the pillar. He wasn't Daniel. He was a stranger, tall, dressed in a dark jacket, eyes half hidden beneath the brim of his cap. He watched her, not with curiosity, but with a kind of knowing quiet, like he understood that she wasn't waiting for anyone. Like he, too, carried his own kind of silence. For a moment, she thought of leaving, walking out, finding a motel, pretending the day hadn't happened. But something in her wouldn't let go. The sight of Daniel, his calm, his untouched arrogance, had reopened something she thought she'd buried years ago. She remembered another day, another goodbye, a hospital room, a father's trembling hand reaching for hers. "Promise me, Maya, don't let people like him take your kindness from you." She had promised. But she had failed. Now, as she stared at the empty tracks, she whispered to the wind, "I'm sorry, Dad. I didn't forget. I just waited." The man behind her shifted, his boots scraping the concrete softly. Maya turned her head slightly, catching his reflection in the glass. Their eyes met for a fleeting second. He didn't look away. Her heartbeat quickened, not out of fear but recognition. He gave a small, almost confused smile, gentle, uncertain. Maya hesitated, fingers tightening around the red scarf. She rose slowly, suitcase in hand, her breath unsteady. For a brief second, she thought about walking toward him. Instead, she stood still, caught between leaving and returning, between her pain and his punishment, her story not yet ready to end. The station had quieted, emptied of its rush-hour noise. Only a few scattered passengers lingered, their faces ghostly under the flickering platform lights. Outside, rain began to fall, soft at first, then heavier, drumming against the glass panels like restless fingers tapping on old wounds. Maya stood beneath the overhang, her suitcase at her side, watching the drops blur the world beyond. The stranger was still there. He hadn't spoken, hadn't moved far, just shifted from one side of the pillar to the other, as if guarding a space between them that neither could cross. For reasons she couldn't name, his silence didn't feel threatening. It felt familiar. When lightning cracked across the sky, she caught sight of his hands. They were rough, scarred, a worker's hands, like her father's had been. His shoes were worn down, the soles uneven, wet from the rain that now pooled across the floor. And when he bent slightly to pick up a fallen ticket stub, something slipped from his coat pocket. A photograph, faint and creased. Maya's breath hitched. It was a picture of a woman and a little girl, smiling in front of an old truck. The edges were torn, the colors fading. The girl's hair was tied with a ribbon, the same shade of red as Maya's scarf. He noticed her looking. Slowly he reached for the photo, tucking it back into his wallet with quiet care. "She's gone," he said, voice low and raw. Then, as if regretting the words, he looked away. Maya didn't reply, but the air between them changed. Something fragile, unspoken, began to take root. She saw it then, the invisible mirror. His loss was her reflection, his silence her echo. The rain thickened, tapping against her coat. Her fingers itched to pull the scarf tighter, but she didn't move. Daniel's face flashed again in her mind. The smirk, the lies, the slow erosion of her trust. She had promised herself she would never feel pity again. Not for men who hid behind their sorrow. Not for anyone who reminded her of what she'd lost. And yet this stranger's grief felt real. Undeniable. She wanted to leave, to escape the pull of this quiet, uncertain connection before it became another wound. Her body said go, but her heart, fragile and furious, stayed. "Do you ever stop waiting for them?" she asked suddenly, her voice trembling more than she wanted it to. He looked at her, rain dripping from his hair, eyes shadowed but steady. "No," he said after a long pause. "You just learn to carry what's left." Thunder rolled above, deep and distant. For a long moment, neither spoke again. The world outside blurred into silver streaks. And as the lights flickered once more, Maya felt it, something shifting inside her. She wasn't sure if it was fate reaching out, or another trick of the darkness she tried so hard to escape. The storm had slowed but not stopped. Rain fell in thin silver lines now, tracing paths down the station windows, painting reflections that looked too much like ghosts. The benches were nearly empty. The air smelled of wet metal, old paper, and forgotten stories. Maya stood by the vending machine, her fingers shaking as she tried to unwrap a chocolate bar she didn't even want. Hunger wasn't the ache she felt. It was something deeper, heavier, nameless. The stranger, still there, still watching without intruding, stood a few meters away, his coat dripping from the rain. Every time she turned slightly, she could feel his eyes on her. Not with pity, not with curiosity, just presence. Her suitcase leaned against her knee, its edges damp. The red scarf slipped from her lap and fell again, this time near his feet. He bent slowly, picking it up. His fingers brushed the fabric carefully, reverently, as if he knew it wasn't just a scarf, as if he could sense the weight of memory stitched into its threads. When he held it out to her, something inside her cracked open. "Some people," he said softly, carry more than just bags, they carry silence. The words hit her like rain on glass, gentle, but impossible to ignore. She took the scarf back, but her hands wouldn't stop trembling. For a second, she wanted to tell him everything, to pour out every buried scream, every lie, every night she'd spent convincing herself she was fine. Instead, she whispered, and silence gets heavy. A woman passing by shot her a fleeting glance, half pity, half discomfort. Two men near the kiosk lowered their voices, pretending not to watch. Society's quiet judgment hummed around her like static, seeing her not as a person, but as a scene. A girl alone in a station, holding a red scarf and looking like she'd lost something too private to name. Maya turned away. Her throat burned. She walked toward the exit, each step echoing louder than it should. The sliding doors hissed open, the cold night air bit her skin. She could leave. She should leave. But her feet stopped. Through the glass reflection, she saw him again. The stranger, still standing there. This time, he wasn't watching her. He was staring at the photo he carried, tracing the edges of a smiling woman and child as though they might return if he held still long enough. Maya's eyes blurred. Her pulse thundered. For a second, the world swayed between them, her grief and his loss, twined by invisible strings. She pressed the scarf to her lips, the fabric damp against her breath. Then, without turning, she whispered to herself, "Maybe punishment isn't something we give. Maybe it's what we live." And with that, she stood frozen, half in the rain, half in her memories, as the night quietly decided what would break first, the silence or her heart. Morning light broke through the rain clouds, casting a dull glow over the station cafe. Maya sat in the corner, hands wrapped around a paper cup gone cold long ago. She hadn't gone home. She hadn't even left the station. Sleep had stayed away, leaving her mind looping through the same questions that refused to quiet down. The stranger, whose name she still didn't know, was gone. Only his shadow lingered in her thoughts, along with the image of the photograph he had tucked so carefully into his wallet. That red ribbon in the little girl's hair, it hadn't left her mind. She reached for her phone, pulling up the job application she had sent the night before. The company name at the top of the email blinked back at her, DNL Industries. The same company Daniel owned. The same one she had sworn she'd never step near again. Her stomach twisted. She almost deleted the email. But something in her, something reckless and wounded, clicked open details. The listed address made her breath hitch. Not Daniel's head office. A branch in the old district. Her eyes flicked lower. Branch director, Elias Lane. Her blood ran cold. The name printed beneath the company logo matched the one she'd seen on the man's train ticket, E. Lane. She rose from her seat, the cup spilling slightly as her hand shook. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. That quiet man, the one who spoke of silence and loss, wasn't a drifter at all. He was the man who held power over her next step in life. And worse, she now realized the truth behind the photograph. The girl in the picture wasn't just any child. She had worn the same red ribbon as the scarf Maya now held. Not a coincidence, never that. When she stood at the counter to pay, her reflection stared back from the cafe window, eyes hollow, scarf bright against her coat. Her mother's voice echoed faintly in her mind. "When it's too cold to speak, this will keep you warm enough to remember who you are." But now the warmth burned. Elias's words from the night before looped back. Some people carry more than just bags, they carry silence. She finally understood. His silence wasn't just empathy, it was guilt. The company's records, the layoffs, the accident Daniel had buried years ago, her father had worked for them. She couldn't unknow it. By the time she reached the office building, the clouds had parted, and sunlight hit the glass doors with a blinding glare. She stood before the entrance, fingers clutching the scarf tight around her neck. Her reflection shimmered in the glass, half woman, half reckoning. Maya stepped forward. The doors slid open, and as she crossed the threshold into the world that had once destroyed her, she knew, whatever came next, there was no turning back. The office was nothing like she imagined. Glass walls, polished floors, a silence that felt too clean to be human. The same silence Daniel used to command, cold, sharp, and expensive. Yet the man behind the desk wasn't Daniel. Elias looked up slowly, his expression unreadable, his hands folded neatly on the table. The photo from last night now rested beside a silver pen. Maya's pulse quickened. The rain outside had stopped, but the storm inside her hadn't. "I didn't expect to see you here," he said quietly, his voice steady. "I didn't expect to find you here either," she replied, her tone soft but edged. He leaned back, studying her face as if memorizing something he couldn't name. "You applied for the assistant position," he said, glancing at her file. "You're overqualified." She gave a hollow laugh. "I've been told that before." For a long moment, neither spoke. The hum of the ceiling lights filled the air between them. Then, slowly, he reached into his drawer and placed something on the desk, a folded piece of red fabric. "Her scarf." Maya froze. "You kept it." He nodded. "It reminded me of her," he said. "My daughter. She used to wear a ribbon just like this." The words hit like a wave, collapsing everything she thought she knew. She had carried that scarf like a promise, a wound, a weapon. But to him, it was memory, love, loss. "You worked for Daniel," she whispered, piecing it together. "You knew what he did." Elias's jaw tightened. "I was part of it, not proud of it, but I can't change what's already been written." Her eyes glistened. "He destroyed my father, my family. You watched." He didn't deny it, and I've been watching ever since. The confession burned through the air. She wanted to hate him, to throw the scarf in his face, to walk out and never look back. But when she saw his hands trembling, she realized guilt had been his punishment all along. "I thought revenge would feel like power," she said, her voice breaking. "But it just feels like weight." He looked at her then, really looked. "Then let it go. Don't carry what I already buried." Her breath caught. Slowly, she took the scarf from the desk, fingers tracing its torn edge one last time. Then she placed it beside the photograph. "For her," she whispered. "And for him." Outside, sunlight pushed through the clouds, casting warm light over the glass walls. She turned toward the window, the same kind of reflection as the station's glass doors, but this time, she wasn't the one being left behind. "Some people," he murmured, repeating her words, "carry more than just bags. They carry silence," she finished softly. She walked out without another glance, her suitcase lighter than it had ever felt. At the station that evening, the crowd moved just as it had before. Faces, voices motion, but this time she wasn't still. She was moving, too. As the train doors closed behind her, the scarf's red thread shimmered faintly in the sunlight before disappearing into the wind. And in that fading moment, one truth lingered. Not every stranger you help is meant to stay, but some leave you changed forever. The city had quieted by dusk. The rain from the day before had rinsed the streets clean, leaving the air tender and new. Maya walked along the narrow lane near her apartment, her coat brushing softly against her legs, her steps slow but sure. There was no suitcase this time, no scarf fluttering in the wind. Only her, lighter, still bruised in places unseen, but breathing differently now. Inside her small apartment, light from the window touched everything gently. The cracked mug on the counter, the stack of unpaid bills, the quiet order of survival. She placed her bag on the table and stood by the window, watching people below reunite, argue, embrace, part, ordinary fragments of a life she was learning to join again. On the shelf sat a small wooden box. She opened it carefully. Inside, folded neatly, was the red scarf. The fabric had faded at the edges, its once bright color now the shade of a soft memory. She ran her fingers over it one last time before closing the lid. It wasn't a symbol of revenge anymore. It was a record of who she'd been and how far she'd come from that station of ghosts. Her reflection in the glass looked steadier now. Not healed, just present, whole enough to begin again. She thought of Elias's words, his quiet grief, his weary eyes, the way his voice trembled when he spoke of the daughter he'd lost. In another life, she might have hated him forever. But something in her understood now, pain doesn't always choose sides. Sometimes, it just finds mirrors. As the city lights blinked on, Maya whispered into the quiet. Sometimes love is not romance, it's recognition. Love was what she had found in the ruins of hate. Recognition was what she had offered to a man broken differently, but just as deeply. She sat by the window, the night unfolding around her. From somewhere distant came the sound of a passing train, faint, familiar. It no longer echoed with loss. It was just a sound. Life moving forward. Her phone buzzed once on the table, a message from an unknown number. She didn't open it. Not yet. Some things could wait. For the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of silence. Maya leaned back, eyes tracing the sky as it darkened, clouds drifting apart to reveal faint stars. She smiled, not the smile of victory but of release. And as the last light touched her face, the thoughts settled quietly within her. Some wounds don't close, they simply learn to breathe.